The Malthari research vessel, eclipsed dawn, drifted through the void like a sliver of frozen lightning, its flowing organic hull shimmering with aurora hues. Bioluminescent panels pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves, casting violet reflections across the crystalline command deck. Commander Malthari stood motionless at the observation spire, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, watching the distant blue-green orb of Earth. To the Malthari, humanity had always been an anomaly, a species of contradictions. They built towering cities, yet waged war with the ferocity of pack predators. They created symphonies, yet engineered weapons that could crack continents. The galactic consensus had dismissed them as too volatile, too emotional to be a true threat. But Malthari had studied their history. He knew better. "Begin the deep scan," he murmured, his voice resonating with the harmonic hum of Malthari speech. At the central analysis node, scientist Sullivan activated the ship's crystalline sensors. The air shimmered as translucent filaments extended, weaving a lattice of purple, white energy around the planet below. The scan was not merely of infrastructure or fleet movements. It was a genetic dissection. The Malthari sought the root of human resilience, the biological secret that allowed them to endure where other species shattered. The first data streams flickered across the holographic displays. Sullivan's silver-veined fingers danced over the controls, parsing the information with clinical precision. Then, abruptly, his movement stilled. Malthari felt the shift in the air, a tension like the moment before a storm. "Report." Sullivan did not answer immediately. His bioluminescent markings dimmed, an involuntary reaction to distress. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Commander, their DNA. It is not like ours." Malthari approached, his own pulse quickening. The hologram displayed a double helix, but it was wrong. Where Malthari genetic structures were elegant, symmetrical, humanity's was a chaotic tapestry, jagged, interlaced with dormant codes, remnants of ancient plagues. Survival adaptations that should have been impossible. And then Sullivan activated the trauma response simulation. The projection flared to life, mapping human neural pathways under extreme stress. Malthari watched as the simulated mind, fractured by pain, by loss, reassembled itself. Not through logic, not through Malthari serenity, but through something raw and relentless. The human psyche did not break. It adapted. It grew stronger. Sullivan recoiled. This is not natural. No species should be able to. A chime from the comms array cut him off. The eclipsed dawn's passive sensors had detected an incoming transmission. Human military frequency. Malthari turned toward the display as the message resolved into a crisp, unadorned voice. "This unidentified vessel. This is Major Elizabeth Sullivan of the United Sol Defense Fleet. You are in restricted space. Identify yourselves." There was no panic in her tone. No hesitation, only the calm certainty of a predator that had already marked its prey. Sullivan's fingers trembled. "Commander, their warships are moving to intercept." Malthari exhaled slowly. The simulations had been theoretical, but now, faced with the reality of human defiance, he understood the truth. The Malthari had come to study humanity. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. The Malthari command spire hummed with the quiet tension of a storm gathering at the edge of the void. Malthari stood motionless before the holographic projection of the human warships, blocky, angular constructs of blackened alloy and reinforced plating, so crude compared to the flowing silver, violet elegance of Malthari vessels. Yet there was something unnerving in their design. No wasted curves, no artistry, only brutal, unapologetic efficiency. Sullivan's bioluminescent markings flickered erratically, his neural tendrils coiling tight against his skull. "Their formation is textbook," he murmured, fingers dancing across the crystalline interface. "Standard Terran intercept pattern. But their vectors are wrong." Malthari tilted his head, studying the tactical display. The human ships weren't just moving to block their exit. They were positioning themselves in staggered layers, overlapping fields of fire, each vessel covering the blind spots of the others. A defensive formation, yet their engines burned at full readiness, not retreat, not surrender. Preparing to attack while appearing to defend. A shiver traced down Malvar's spine. The Malthari had studied 1,000 species, cataloged their instincts, their limitations. Fear triggered flight, aggression triggered reckless charges. But this was something else. The comms array chimed again. The human voice returned, sharper this time. Unidentified vessel, this is your final warning. Power down your drives and prepare for boarding. Thelalin's tendrils stiffened. They can't be serious. Their weapons are primitive, their shielding is barely. A proximity alert flared. The Duris eclipsed Dawn's sensors lit up as a swarm of projectiles streaked toward them, railgun rounds, unguided, unremarkable. Malvar almost dismissed them until the tactical overlay calculated their trajectories. Every shot was aimed past them, not misses. The rounds detonated in precise sequence, forming a grid of plasma bursts that boxed the eclipsed Dawn in without a single wasted shot. The humans weren't firing blindly, they were hurting them. Malvar's claws flexed. Galactic doctrine demanded surrender when outmatched. But the humans didn't know they were outmatched, or worse, they didn't care. Thelalin's voice wavered. Commander, their flagship is hailing us again. The hologram resolved into the image of a human female, Major Elizabeth Sullivan. Her face was unreadable, her posture relaxed, but her eyes, Malvar had seen predators before. This was something worse, a predator that smiled. Last chance, she said, her voice calm. Surrender or we will demonstrate why humanity has never lost a war. Thelalin's breath hitched. They're bluffing. They have to be. Malvar said nothing. Because the scans didn't lie, and the humans weren't bluffing. They were waiting. The eclipsed Dawn hung in the void, its bioluminescent panels flickering with uncertainty. The human warships had not fired again. Not yet. But their silence was worse than any barrage. Malvar could feel the weight of their restraint pressing against the Malthari vessel like the slow, inevitable crush of a black hole. Thelalin's fingers danced across the crystalline interface, streams of purple, white energy pulsing beneath his touch. Initial scans complete. Commander, he murmured. His voice was steady, but the slight tremor in his crest betrayed him. Malvar did not need to ask what the readings showed. The data shimmered in the air before them, a holographic tapestry of numbers, schematics, and biological readouts. The human flagship, designated Iron Resolve, was a brute force anomaly, its armor layered with alloys that absorbed and redistributed energy, its weapon systems designed not for efficiency, but for overkill. But it was the secondary scans that made Thelalin's breath catch. Commander, he said, his voice hollow. Their crew signatures. Malvar's gaze locked onto the biological readouts. Human vitals, heart rates, neural activity. Stress markers. They were calm, not the forced stillness of discipline, not the numb acceptance of impending death. These readings showed the steady, unshaken rhythm of predators who had already won. Thelalin's claws twitched. This is impossible, their adrenaline levels should be spiking. Their neural patterns should show distress. Malvar cut him off with a sharp gesture. Run the deep scan. Thelalin hesitated. The genetic analysis. Commander, that protocol is reserved for. A pulse of violet energy rippled through the Daw's eclipsed Dawn's scanners, reaching deeper than surface vitals, deeper than muscle and bone. It touched the helix, strands of human DNA itself. The results took 3 seconds to process. Thelalin's recoiled as if struck. Malvar did not move. He did not blink. He simply stared at the data unfolding before him, a genetic blueprint of resilience that defied all known Malthari doctrine. Human DNA was a battlefield, scars of ancient plagues, markers of radiation exposure, epigenetic switches forged in famine and war. Their genome was not clean, it was not cell-efficient. It was adaptive, Worse, it was expected. Thelalan's voice was a whisper. Commander, their genetic memory Malvar had seen species with trauma responses, with instinctual fear hardwired into their cells. But this human DNA did not remember fear. It remembered victory. Thelalan's hands shook. They don't just recover from stress. They anticipate it. Their cells prepare for damage before it even happens. A chime cut through the silence. The human flagship was hailing them again. The hologram resolved into Major Sullivan's face. She had not moved, had not so much as shifted her weight. But her smile had sharpened. "Tick-tock, Malthari," she said softly. "We're not getting any younger." The transmission cut. Thelalan exhaled, his crest flattened against his skull. "They know what we just found." Malvar said nothing. Because the scans did not lie. And the humans were not waiting for surrender. They were waiting for the Malthari to understand. The silence in the Malthari command nexus was thick, pressurized like the air before a storm. Thelalan's fingers hovered over the holographic interface, the streaming purple, white energy of their luminescent displays casting jagged reflections across his silvered face. The data from the human DNA scans pulsed before him, a fractured, contradictory nightmare of biological defiance. Malvar stood motionless, his crystalline armor catching the ambient aurora glow of the ship's atmospheric condensers. His mind, usually a precision instrument of tactical certainty, churned with the implications. Human cells did not merely repair damage. They empties it. Thelalan had run the simulations 3 times. Each iteration yielded the same impossible result. Human physiology didn't just endure stress, it has adapted to it. Rewrote itself in anticipation of future trauma. A soldier's muscle fibers thickened before the battle. Neural pathways rerouted around potential injury. Immune systems stockpiled defenses against pathogens they had never encountered. It wasn't evolution, it was preparation for war. A low chime resonated through the chamber, another transmission from the human flagship. Thelalan flinched, his crest flattening further against his skull. The hologram shimmered into existence, revealing Major Sullivan once more. She hadn't moved, hadn't so much as blinked. But her eyes, those unnerving, predator-still eyes, locked onto Malvar with the weight of a starship's gravity anchor. "Still analyzing, Commander." Her voice was calm, almost amused. "We can wait. Though I'd advise against taking too long." The transmission severed. The Lolan exhaled through his secondary respiratory vents, the sound thin with something Malvar had never heard from him before: dread. "They knew," Thelalan whispered. "They knew we'd scan them. They wanted us to see this." Malvar's talons flexed against the command console. The humans weren't just unafraid of being studied, they had engineered their own biology as a psychological weapon. A message carved into the helix of their existence. "We do not break." Thelalan's hands trembled as he pulled up another dataset. Historical records of human conflicts, centuries of wars fought with primitive brutality, then industrialized slaughter, then cold, calculated genocide. Each era should have shattered them. Instead, their had learned. Malvar's tactical display flickered, the ship's crystalline sensors registering a power surge from the human vessel. Not an attack, a pulse, a single, resonant thrum of energy that vibrated through the Malthari hull like a predator's growl. The humans weren't waiting for surrender, they were waiting for the Malthari to realize they had already lost. Thelalan's voice was barely audible. "Commander, what do we do?" Malvar said nothing. Because for the first time in his life, the great strategist of the Malthari ascendancy had no answer. The silence on the Malthari command deck was thick enough to suffocate. Bioluminescent panels pulsed erratically, their usual rhythmic glow disrupted by the tension coiling through the ship. Malvar stood motionless, his crystalline fingers resting against the curved tactical display. The data streaming across its surface painted a picture no Malthari strategist had ever conceived. an enemy that did not merely fight, but evolved in the midst of war. The human vessel hung in the void before them, its angular, brutish silhouette a stark contrast to the Malthari's flowing organic design. It was not beautiful, it was not elegant. It was a blade forged in fire, its edges honed by centuries of conflict. And now, it waited. Malvar's mind raced through the implications of Thelalin's discovery. Human DNA was not static, it was a battlefield in itself, reshaped by trauma, hardened by suffering. Their bodies did not merely endure pain, they remembered it. They adapted. They grew stronger. A soft chime broke the silence. The communication array flickered to life, and the holographic projection of a human officer materialized before them. Major Elizabeth Sullivan stood with the effortless authority of someone who had faced annihilation and laughed in its face. Her uniform was crisp, her posture unyielding, but her eyes, those were what unsettled Malvar the most. They were calm, not the forced serenity of a diplomat, but the deep, unshakable calm of a predator that had already won. "Commander Malvar," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a species that had clawed its way from the mud to the stars. "I assume your scientists have finished their analysis." Malvar's crest of sensory filaments stiffened. She knew. Of course she knew. The pulse from their ship had not been a threat. It had been a confirmation. A way to ensure the Malthari understood exactly what they were dealing with. Thelalin's voice was a whisper. "They've been scanning us in return." Malvar did not react, but the realization settled like ice in his veins. The humans had not just allowed the Malthari to study them. They had wanted it. They had wanted the Malthari to see the truth. Sullivan's gaze never wavered. "You came here expecting primitives. You found soldiers." She tilted her head slightly, as if considering a puzzle. "Now, you have a choice. You can leave, or you can stay and learn just how deep our resilience goes." Harsh behind her, the hologram flickered, revealing a glimpse of the human ship's interior. Corporal Nathan Banks stood at attention, his expression unreadable. His presence was a silent statement, proof that humanity did not stand alone. They stood together. Malvar's tactical instincts screamed at him. Every calculation, every simulation, every doctrine of Malthari warfare had just been rendered obsolete. This was not a battle of technology or firepower. It was a battle of Seru will, and humanity had spent millennia perfecting theirs. The command deck hummed with suppressed energy, the ship's organic systems reacting to the tension in the air. The Malthari crew watched their commander, their usual fluid grace replaced by uncertainty. Malvar exhaled slowly, his decision crystallizing. He had no answer. But for the first time, he understood. That was the point. The Malthari archives were vast, their crystalline data vaults containing millennia of military doctrine, painstakingly refined through countless conflicts. Yet as Malvar stood before the shimmering projection of human history, he felt the weight of something missing. The hologram flickered to life, displaying grainy footage from Earth's past. Wars fought not with plasma lances or gravity disruptors, but with crude firearms, bayonets, and bare hands. Thelolin, the chief scientist, had dismissed these records as irrelevant, primitive, chaotic, unworthy of study. But Malvar had ordered a deeper scan. Now, he watched as human soldiers, say actual flesh and blood beings, unaugmented by cybernetics or genetic enhancements, charged across frozen battlefields, their breath steaming in the air, their boots sinking into mud and snow. They fell by the thousands, yet they kept coming. No retreat, no surrender, just an unbroken tide of bodies pushing forward, even as artillery turned the earth to hell around them. The Malthari had no equivalent. Their warriors fought with precision, their tactics honed by cold logic. When losses exceeded projected thresholds, they withdrew. To do otherwise was irrational, yet here in these ancient human wars, entire armies had fought to annihilation, not for resources, not for territory, but for ideas. For flags, for words scribbled on parchment. Malvar's neural interface pulsed with discomfort. His species had long believed that war was a science, a series of equations to be solved. But this was something else. The footage shifted to another conflict. A lone human soldier, his uniform tattered, dragging a wounded comrade through a storm of gunfire. The Malthari tactical AI had already calculated the odds, Asiri. 7% survival probability. Optimal action retreat or euthanize the wounded. The human did neither. He kept crawling. A second soldier emerged from the smoke, sprinting us back into the kill zone to help. Then a third, then a dozen. The Malthari scanning algorithm stuttered, recalibrating in confusion. This behavior defied all known models of self-preservation. Malvar's claws flexed involuntarily. He had seen human ships. He had studied their weapons. But this was the true revelation. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their refusal to accept the arithmetic of despair. The projection flickered again. This time showing a more recent conflict, Major Sullivan's own service record. A siege on some backwater colony, where her unit had been surrounded, outgunned, and left for dead. They had held the line for 17 days. No reinforcements, no hope of victory, just a promise, no one gets left behind. Malvar exhaled, the bioluminescent panels of the command deck dimming slightly in response to his unease. The Malthari had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. And yet, in all their archives, there was no record of anyone fighting like this. The hologram faded, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's organic systems. Behind him, his crew stood frozen, their usually fluid movements stiff with unspoken dread. They had come to assess a potential threat. Instead, they had uncovered something far more terrifying, a species that had spent its entire history practicing for the unwinnable war. And now, for the first time, Malvar wondered what happens when they turn that resolve against us. The Malthari command vessel, Eclipse of Reason, hung in the void like a sliver of frozen lightning, its hull shimmering with the pale violet luminescence of atmospheric condensers. The ship's organic architecture pulsed faintly, as if breathing in time with the crew's unease. Malvar stood before the central hololith, his silver, veined fingers tracing the data streams that spiraled like liquid auroras. The human records had been dissected, analyzed, and reassembled a dozen times, yet they still refused to conform to Malthari logic. 17 days. The number coiled in his mind like a venomous serpent. No Malthari unit, no matter how elite, would have endured that. Their doctrine was precise: retreat when outmatched, regroup when encircled. To fight beyond the point of strategic viability was madness. The hololith flickered, reconstructing the human battlefield. A ruined colony, its prefabricated structures reduced to skeletal husks. Thermal signatures showed the last stand, a tight knot of human soldiers, their heat signatures flaring like dying stars as they expended ammunition, energy, the life with reckless abandon. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive gesture of discomfort. The humans had not merely fought, they had chosen to fight. Behind him, Thelalan's bioluminescent markings pulsed erratically, her usual composure fractured. Their neural scans bare, her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the ship's ambient hum. They rewired themselves. Malvar turned. The scientist's normally fluid posture was rigid, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting jagged shards of light. Thelalan gestured, and the hololith shifted, displaying a human brain scan, a frenetic storm of electrochemical activity. Fear suppression, pain tolerance beyond biological limits. And this, she isolated a neural pathway, its activation pattern flaring like a supernova. They call it the second wind. Malvar's crest of sensory filaments stiffened. The Malthari had spent millennia refining their warriors through genetic optimization and cybernetic enhancement. But this was something else. The humans had not been designed for war. They had invented it. A chime echoed through the command deck. The long-range scanners had detected movement near the human outpost. Malvar's gaze snapped to the feed, a single human dropship, unremarkable in design, descending toward the planet's surface. Standard reconnaissance, perhaps. Then the scanners registered the heat signatures inside. 37. Thelalin's breath hitched. They're volunteers. Malvar's claws flexed involuntarily. Malthari doctrine dictated that no more than 5 operatives be deployed in high-risk zones, loss mitigation, calculated efficiency. But the humans, they sent more. The dropship's engines flared as it breached the atmosphere, its trajectory unwavering. The holith zoomed in, revealing the insignia emblazoned on its hull, a skeletal hand gripping a lightning bolt. Corporal Nathan Banks' unit. Malvar exhaled, the ship's ambient lighting dimming in response to his tension. Somewhere on that planet, Major Elizabeth Sullivan was waiting. And the Malthari were beginning to understand. They had not come to study a military. They had come to witness a reckoning. The Malthari observation deck hummed with the low, pulsating glow of their bioluminescent systems, casting shifting violet shadows across the curved walls. Thelalin's fingers trembled as they hovered over the holith controls, the data streams from the human dropship flickering in erratic bursts. 37. The number burned in Malvar's mind like a brand. No sane species would willingly cram that many soldiers into a single insertion vessel, not unless they had no fear of loss. Or worse, unless they expected it. The dropship's descent was a controlled meteor, its heat shielding glowing white, hot as it carved through the upper atmosphere. Thelalin's secondary scanners picked up the first anomaly before the primary array could recalibrate. "They're not slowing down," Thelalin murmured, their voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the ship's crystalline power conduits. Malvar's crest of sensory spines flared in alarm. Standard insertion protocols dictated a gradual deceleration, controlled, precise, minimizing detection. But the human vessel was plunging like a spear, its trajectory too steep, too ultra-violent. Then the hull split, not from heat stress, not from structural failure, by design. The dropship's armored plates peeled away in segmented sections, revealing not a single pressurized cabin, but a honeycomb of individual drop pods. 37 pinpricks of fire streaked downward, scattering across the battlefield like embers from a wildfire. Malvar's claws dug into the command console, the aerogel surface yielding slightly under the pressure. This wasn't insertion. This was saturation. The holith flickered as it struggled to track the pod's trajectories. Each one was a self-contained assault unit, their heat signatures masked by the plasma wash of re-entry. The Malthari scanners, calibrated for orderly deployments, choked on the chaos. Then the first pod hit, no parachute, no retro thrusters, just a kinetic impact that cratered the earth, the shockwave rippling outward like a stone dropped in water. The pod's outer shell shattered, not from the force of landing, but by explosive bolts detonating on impact. And from the wreckage, a figure rose. Corporal Nathan Banks. His armor was scorched, his visor cracked, but his stance was steady. The Malthari bio-scanners registered his vitals, elevated, yes, but not with fear, with anticipation. Thelalin's breath caught as the remaining pods struck in rapid succession, each one disgorging another soldier, another weapon, another set of eyes scanning the battlefield with predatory focus. Malvar's mind reeled. This wasn't just a breach of containment. It was a flood. And somewhere in that storm of fire and steel, Major Elizabeth Sullivan was waiting. The Malthari had come to study human warfare. They were about to learn what it meant to be hunted. The Malthari command spire hummed with panicked energy, its crystalline walls flickering under the strain of emergency protocols. Malvar's talons scraped against the control console as he watched the tactical display, a swirling nightmare of red sigils marking human positions. They were everywhere, not just scattered, not just probing. They moved like a single organism, a predator tightening its jaws around prey. Thelalin's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the klaxons. Their neural patterns. They're synchronized. Malvar didn't need the data feeds to confirm it. He could see it. The humans weren't just coordinating. They were anticipating. Every Malthari countermeasure, every defensive shift, they reacted before the orders were even fully transmitted. It made no sense. The Malthari had studied human warfare for decades. They had dissected their tactics, their limitations, their predictable reliance on crude aggression. But this was something else. A shape flickered on the display. Major Elizabeth Sullivan, she moved like a ghost, her armor's heat signature deliberately erratic. Her position shifting faster than the Malthari targeting arrays could lock. And then, a pulse of violet energy erupted from a Malthari sentry turret. Sullivan didn't dodge, she stepped into it. The beam seared across her shoulder, vaporizing armor plating. Thelalin's breath hitched. Humans weren't supposed to endure direct hits from iron lances. But Sullivan didn't stagger, didn't scream. She smiled. And then she was moving again faster, her rifle barking in short, precise bursts. The Malthari turret exploded in a shower of crystalline shards. Malvar's blood ran cold. This wasn't resilience. This was calculation. The humans weren't just enduring pain, they were using it. Every injury, every near miss, every second of strain fed into some unfathomable combat algorithm, sharpening their reactions, refining their assault. And then the comms crackled, a human voice. Not Sullivan's. "Major, we've got their command vector locked." Sullivan's response was calm, almost amused. "Then let's give them a choice." The display flared. The Malthari spire's outer defenses collapsed in a cascade of failures, not from brute force, but from something far worse. Sabotage. The humans had hacked their systems. Not through code, not through some digital intrusion. Through Era's biology. Thelalin's hands trembled as the realization struck. The humans hadn't just breached the perimeter. They'd infected it, nanites, microscopic, undetectable, woven into the very air they breathed, the surfaces they touched. The Malthari's flowing organic tech, so elegant, so alive, had been turned against them. Malvar's claws clenched. There was only one option left. But as he turned to give the order, the display flickered one last time and showed Sullivan standing at the base of the spire. Looking up, the Malthari had come to study human warfare. Now, they faced its final lesson. The spire's crystalline walls pulsed with erratic light, their once smooth flows of purple, white energy now jagged and fractured. Thelalin's breath came in short, panicked bursts as his fingers danced across the bioluminescent panels, desperate to stabilize the failing systems. But the data streams were corrupted, the organic circuits, infected. Human nanites, they had slithered into the Malthari's living technology like a virus, rewriting its functions from within. Thellalin had studied human warfare, their crude kinetics, their blunt force explosives. But this was something else. This was insidious. Across the command spire, Malvar stood motionless, his silver, carved claws flexing in silent fury. The display before him flickered, showing the human commander, Sullivan, standing at the base of their fortress. She wasn't attacking, she wasn't even speaking. She was waiting. Malvar's mind raced. Retreat was the logical choice. The Malthari were scholars first, warriors second. Their doctrine demanded withdrawal. When faced with an unknown threat, regroup, analyze, adapt. But something in Sullivan's stillness unsettled him. It wasn't the posture of a conqueror. It was the patience of a predator who had already won. Behind him, the air hummed with the dissonant whine of failing systems. The spire's atmospheric condensers, once a masterpiece of flowing metal alloys, now shuddered as the nanites rewrote their functions. The air tasted metallic, charged with the scent of ionization, like the moment before a storm. Thelalin's voice was a whisper. "They didn't just hack us. They understood us." Malvar's crest of crystalline spines flattened against his skull. The humans had scanned of them, not just their technology, but their EV biology. Their weaknesses, their instincts, and now, they were exploiting every single one. Outside, the sky darkened as the spire's energy fields collapsed, the aurora, like shields flickering out like dying stars. The humans hadn't fired a single shot. They hadn't needed to, they had simply infected the battlefield. Malvar's claws twitched toward the evacuation signal. But then the display flared one last time. A transmission, Sullivan's face filled the screen, her expression unreadable. No demands, no threats, just a single word. Pulsing in the Malthari's own flowing script, Thelalan recoiled. They had learned our language. As Malvar exhaled, the weight of realization pressing down on him. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a lesson. And the humans had been teaching it from the very beginning. The command spire's bioluminescent panels flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows across Malvar's face as the weight of Sullivan's single word settled over him. So yield. Not a plea, not a negotiation, just a statement of inevitability. Written in the Malthari's own flowing script, as if to emphasize how deeply they had been dissected. Thelalan's slender fingers trembled over the console, the translucent interface reflecting in his wide, violet eyes. The humans hadn't just breached their systems, they had understood them. Their language, their architecture, the very rhythm of their thoughts. And now, the battlefield lay silent, not because of firepower, but because the humans had turned the Malthari's own technology into a weapon against them. The air tasted of ionized failure, Malvar's claws flexed, the crystalline edges catching the dying light of the spire's shields. He had studied human warfare, their chaotic rebellions, their stubborn refusal to surrender, even when outmatched. But this was something else. This was precision, this was utter patience. A low hum vibrated through the deck as the last of the spire's atmospheric condensers shut down, the flowing purple, white energy currents dissipating like mist. Outside, the human vessels held position, their angular silhouettes stark against the aurora-lit sky. No triumphant barrage, no boarding parties, just silence. Thelalan's voice was barely audible. They knew. Malvar didn't need to ask what he meant. The humans had known everything. Their scanning had gone beyond schematics and shield frequencies. It had mapped an instinct. The way Malthari commanders hesitated when flanked. How their soldiers reacted to certain frequencies of light. Even the subconscious recoil at the scent of burning aerogel. And they had weaponized it all. A flicker on the display, Sullivan's face again, this time accompanied by Corporal Banks, his expression unreadable beneath the visor of his helmet. No gloating, no demands, just observation. Thelalan's spines rippled in distress. This isn't war, this is dissection. Malvar exhaled, the realization settling like ice in his veins. The humans hadn't come to conquer, they had come to teach. And the lesson was simple: Guy, you underestimated us. The spire's last functioning screen blinked once before fading to black, leaving only the ghost of Sullivan's final transmission lingering in the air. Malvar turned toward the evacuation corridor, his steps heavy with the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The galaxy had made a mistake, and the humans had just proven it. The evacuation corridors hummed with the low, panicked murmur of Malthari voices, whispers that slithered through the crystalline passageways like frightened serpents. Malvar moved among them, his bioluminescent markings dimmed in the eerie half-light of emergency power. The air tasted metallic, charged with the ozone tang of failing atmospheric regulators. Somewhere deep in the spire's substructure, a conduit ruptured, sending a shudder through the deck that made the fleeing scientists stumble. Thelalan clutched a data crystal to his chest, its violet glow pulsing erratically against his translucent carapace. The last of the human behavioral models flickered across its surface, numbers, probabilities, predictions, all of it useless now. The simulations had been flawless, the humans should have broken. They hadn't. Ahead, a cluster of junior analysts, huddled around a flickering holo display, their spines rigid with horror. Malthari didn't need to see the feed to know what played across it, the same looping footage from the surface. Human soldiers. Just 2 of them. Moving through the ruins of the Malthari forward base. Not with the reckless fury the simulations had anticipated, but with methodical, chilling precision. One of the analysts turned, his ocular membranes wide with disbelief. "Commander, they're still advancing." Malthari didn't answer. He didn't need to, the evidence was there, etched into the trembling hands of his crew, the fractured edges of their doctrine. The humans weren't just enduring the psychological warfare, they were theirs adapting. Corporal Banks' helmet cam footage had spread through the Spire's network like a virus. The Malthari had watched, helpless, as he and Sullivan navigated the ruins, their movements unhurried, their weapons never wavering. They paused only once, when Banks knelt beside a fallen Malthari soldier, his armored fingers brushing the alien's cracked carapace, a gesture not of mercy, recognition. Sullivan's voice was a whisper. "They're studying us." Malthari's mandibles tightened. Of course they were. The humans had turned the battlefield into a laboratory, and the Malthari were the specimens. Every flinch, every hesitation, every instinctive recoil, all of it was being cataloged, dissected, weaponized. A distant explosion rocked the spire, sending a cascade of crystalline shards raining from the ceiling. The evacuation turned frantic, bodies pressing forward in a surge of panic. Malthari let them pass, his gaze fixed on the last functioning display, a grainy feed of Sullivan standing atop a shattered Malthari barricade, her rifle slung casually over one shoulder. She wasn't even looking at the spire. She was looking beyond it, toward the Malthari homeworld. Sullivan made a sound like a dying machine. They're not stopping here." Malthari exhaled, the weight of the realization crushing him. The humans hadn't just shattered their tactics. They had shattered the illusion, the lie the entire galaxy had told itself about them. They weren't primitive, they weren't reckless, they were as inevitable. And the terror, Malthari knew, was only beginning. The Malthari spire trembled again, its crystalline lattice groaning under the strain of distant detonations. Malthari watched the evacuation through narrowed eyes, his mind still locked onto that final image, Sullivan standing atop the ruins of their defenses, her gaze fixed on the horizon like a predator measuring the distance to its prey. Sullivan's voice crackled through the comms, stripped of its usual precision. "The data is corrupted. The humans, their neural patterns, they don't make sense." Malthari didn't answer. He didn't need to. The proof was in the way the human soldiers moved through the battlefield not as individuals, but as a single organism, adapting, shifting, learning faster than any Malthari predictive algorithm could track. Their resilience wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something the Malthari had never accounted for. A flicker of purple, white energy surged through the spire's conduits as the last of the evacuation shuttles launched, their sleek, wind-carved hulls cutting through the ionized atmosphere. Malthari remained. His duty wasn't to flee. It was to understand. The display before him flickered back to life, feeding him fragmented data from the battlefield. Corporal Nathan Banks, a name the Malthari databases had once dismissed as insignificant, was leading a squad through the ruins of the spire's eastern quadrant. His vitals should have been spiking with stress, his cognitive functions degrading under the weight of fatigue and combat trauma. Instead, his heart rate was steady, his neural activity pulsed in rhythmic waves, as if he were in a state of focus rather than fear. Malthari's claws flexed against the console. The humans weren't just enduring the chaos. They were harnessing it. A proximity alert blared. Another wave of human reinforcements had breached the perimeter. But these weren't the standard infantry. The signatures were heavier, their energy readings erratic. Sullivan's voice returned, this time laced with something Malthari had never heard from a Malthari scientist before. They've deployed the EXO, troopers. The feed cut to a thermal scan of the battlefield. Human figures clad in mechanized armor moved with terrifying precision, their movements too fluid, too alive for standard combat rigs. These weren't machines, they were extensions of the soldiers inside. Seamless, instinctive, as if the metal had fused with their very bones. One of them turned its helmet toward a Malthari surveillance drone. For a fraction of a second, Malvar swore it, look it at him. Then the feed dissolved into static, the spire's core shuddered. The humans weren't just advancing, they were evolving, adapting their tactics in real time, rewriting the rules of engagement with every step. And the worst part, they were enjoying it. Malvar exhaled, his breath misting in the spire's rapidly cooling air. The Malthari had spent centuries perfecting the art of war, refining it into a precise, calculated science. The humans had turned it into a S-game. And they were winning. The command spire's crystalline walls hummed with failing energy, their aurora hues flickering like dying stars. Malvar stood motionless before the fractured holodisplay, his talons digging into the smooth, wind-carved console. The static, laced feed from the battlefield had finally cut out, but not before showing him the truth. Humanity did not fight like the Malthari. They did not fight like anything in the known galaxy. Thelalin's voice crackled through the failing comms, distorted by atmospheric ionization. High Commander. The neural scans, you need to see this. Malvar turned, his silver, violet carapace reflecting the dim glow of emergency bioluminescent panels. The scientist's normally composed demeanor had shattered. His crest spines trembled, his four eyes dilated with something Malvar had never seen in a Malthari before. The holodisplay flickered back to life, this time showing a data stream, human neural activity during combat. Thelalin's claws danced across the translucent interface, pulling up wave after wave of incomprehensible readings. Their brain chemistry. It doesn't make sense. Thelallin hissed. Under fire, their cortisol levels drop, their dopamine spikes, their prefrontal cortex doesn't suppress instinct. It enhances it. Malvar stared. The readings were impossible. Every known species in the galaxy, when faced with mortal danger, defaulted to one of three responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Humans did none of those things. They thrived. A new feed overlaid the data, a helmet, cam recording from one of the human EXO troopers. The perspective lurched violently as the soldier, Corporal Nathan Banks, according to the tag, dodged a plasma burst, rolled, and returned fire without hesitation. His vitals flashed alongside the footage: steady heartbeat, elevated but controlled respiration. And then he laughed, a raw, exhilarated sound, cutting through the chaos of battle like a blade. Malvar's blood ran cold. Thelalin's voice was barely a whisper now. They don't just endure stress. They revel in it. Their bodies treat combat like a challenge to overcome. A Thar's game to win. The feed switched again, this time to Major Elizabeth Sullivan's command channel. She stood amidst the ruins of a Malthari outpost, her armor scorched but her posture relaxed, one boot resting casually on a shattered crystalline console. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice calm, almost amused. "They're falling back to the spire. Banks, take your squad and flank through the condensers. Rest of you, keep them busy. Let's show these bastards how humans play." The transmission cut. Silence filled the command spire. Malvar's mind raced. The Malthari had studied war for centuries, perfected it into a precise, elegant science of calculated strikes and measured retreats. Every engagement was a symphony of controlled variables. The humans had reduced it to a street brawl, and they were better at it. The spire shuddered again, deeper this time. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something sharp and metallic. Humanity. Malvar exhaled slowly, his talons retracting. The Malthari had scanned their DNA, studied their history, analyzed their tactics. They had missed the most important variable of all. Humans didn't just survive chaos, They have bred it. And now, the galaxy would burn. The command spire's crystalline walls pulsed with erratic violet light, the bioluminescent panels flickering as if in distress. Malvar stood motionless at the central hololith, his talons hovering over the shimmering tactical display. The data streams twisted in chaotic spirals. Human forces were moving in ways that defied all Malthari predictive algorithms. They had expected a retreat. Instead, the humans had split. One unit continued pressing forward, their movements erratic, their fire patterns unpredictable. The other, Banks' squad, had vanished from sensors entirely, swallowed by the labyrinth of atmospheric condensers that lined the spire's lower levels. The Malthari had designed those structures to purify the thin, ionized air of their homeworld. Now, they had become a killing ground. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive response to the rising tension in the chamber. Thelalan, the lead scientist, stood rigid beside him, his silver, veined crest trembling. His fingers danced over a data slate, pulling up genetic scans of the human soldiers, records they had taken from prisoners months ago. Their neural plasticity. It's not just adaptability, Thelalan murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the spire's failing energy conduits. It's something else. Something as deeper. Malvar didn't respond. He didn't need to. The humans had been scanned, dissected, cataloged. Their DNA was mapped, their psychology analyzed. The Malthari had assumed they understood them, assumed that the humans' reliance on crude, brute force tactics was a weakness. They had been wrong. A tremor ran through the spire's foundations. Somewhere below, something detonated. The hololith flared crimson. Marking the breach, Banks' squad had bypassed the outer defenses entirely, cutting through maintenance tunnels the Malthari had deemed irrelevant. There inside, a junior officer hissed, his aurora-hued plating dimming in distress. Malvar exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The Malthari had waged war with precision, with elegance. Every engagement was a calculation, every loss a variable to be minimized. The humans fought like as animals, they fought like as predators. Thelalan's data slate clattered to the floor, the genetic scans flickering one last time before fading. His crest had flattened entirely now, a sign of utter disbelief. Their stress response. It doesn't degrade under pressure, he whispered. Eta sharpens. Another explosion rocked the spire, closer this time. The air tasted of burning metal and ozone. Malvar's talons flexed. The humans had been underestimated, and now, the spire would fall.